Captain Sarah "Ghost" Martinez pulled her F-35 Lightning II into a perfect barrel roll, the desert landscape spinning beneath her as she executed the maneuver with surgical precision. The radio crackled to life in her helmet. "Outstanding work, Ghost. Return to base for debrief," came the voice of Colonel James Harrison, the squadron commander who had been observing the training exercise from the control tower. Sarah smiled beneath her oxygen mask. After 18 months of proving herself at Nellis Air Force Base, she finally felt like she belonged with the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron. The Green Bats were among the Air Force's most elite units, tasked with testing cutting-edge aircraft and tactics that would shape the future of aerial warfare. As she brought her aircraft in for landing, Sarah reflected on how far she'd come. Growing up in a small Texas town, she'd dreamed of flying since she was 8 years old, when her grandfather took her to an air show, and she watched the Thunderbirds paint the sky with their precision formation flying. Her father, a mechanic at the local airport, had encouraged her dreams even when others laughed. "You sure you don't want to be a flight attendant instead?" her high school guidance counselor had asked when Sarah announced her intention to join the Air Force. "That's more traditional for young ladies." Sarah had politely declined and went on to graduate top of her class from the Air Force Academy, then excelled in pilot training. She'd flown combat missions over Afghanistan and Iraq, earning commendations for her skill and courage. But even with her impressive record, she'd faced skepticism at every turn. The 422nd had been different, or so she thought. Colonel Harrison had personally recruited her after seeing her test scores and combat record. For the first time in her career, Sarah felt like she was judged purely on her abilities rather than her gender. That feeling of belonging was about to be shattered. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the squadron briefing room expecting to receive details about the next phase of testing for the new air-to-air combat systems they'd been evaluating. Instead, she found her fellow pilots huddled in quiet conversation, their faces grim. "What's going on?" she asked Captain Mike Viper Chen, her wingman and closest friend in the squadron. Viper glanced around nervously. "New orders came down from Pentagon brass. There's been some changes to the program." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Colonel Harrison entered the room with a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and imposing, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. The eagles on his uniform marked him as a full colonel, but something about his demeanor suggested even higher rank. "Attention!" Harrison barked, and the assembled pilots snapped to attention. "At ease," Harrison said, but his voice carried an unusual tension. "I want to introduce Colonel Robert Kane. He's here on special assignment from the Pentagon to oversee the next phase of our testing program." Kane stepped forward, his cold eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah. She felt a chill run down her spine at his expression. "Ladies and gentlemen, the nature of our mission is about to change dramatically," Kane announced. His voice was flat and authoritative. "The tests you've been conducting were preliminary. We're now moving into Phase 2, which will involve high-stress combat scenarios that will push both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Due to the extreme nature of these tests and the need for maximum unit cohesion, certain adjustments to personnel will be necessary." Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew what was coming before Kane spoke the words. "Captain Martinez," Kane said, turning to face her directly, "you'll be reassigned to administrative duties effective immediately. Your replacement will arrive tomorrow." The room fell silent. Sarah felt as if she'd been punched in the gut. "Sir, with respect, may I ask why? My performance evaluations have been exemplary, and I have more combat experience than most of the pilots in this room." Kane's expression didn't change. "The decision has been made, Captain. You're dismissed." "This is bullshit," Viper spoke up, his face flushed with anger. Ghost is one of our best pilots. You can't just— Captain Chen. Kane's voice cut through the air like a blade. Unless you'd like to join Captain Martinez in her new assignment, I suggest you remember your place. Sarah placed a hand on Viper's shoulder, stopping him from saying anything else that might jeopardize his career. It's fine, Mike. I'll be fine. But it wasn't fine. As Sarah cleared out her locker later that day, her hands shook with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. 20 years of dedication, countless hours of training, combat missions that had pushed her to her limits, all of it apparently meaningless because of her gender. Colonel Harrison approached her as she was packing her flight gear. The older man looked genuinely troubled. "Sarah, I want you to know this wasn't my decision," he said quietly. "I fought it all the way up the chain of command." "Then who made it?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Harrison glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Kane has friends in very high places. Word is he's being fast-tracked for general, and he's made no secret of his views on women in combat roles." "What about my record? My performance?" "None of that matters to men like Kane," Harrison said sadly. "He sees the military as an old boys' club, and he's not interested in changing that." Sarah closed her locker for what she thought might be the last time. "So what happens now?" "You do your time in admin, keep your head down, and wait for Kane to move on to his next assignment," Harrison advised. "It's not fair, but it's the reality of the situation." But Sarah had never been one to simply accept unfairness. That evening, she sat in her small apartment off base, staring at her laptop screen. She'd been researching Colonel Kane, and what she'd found made her blood boil. Kane had a history of pushing out female personnel from elite units. In his previous assignments, he'd managed to force the transfer of nearly every woman in positions of responsibility, always finding bureaucratic reasons that were difficult to challenge directly. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria, a lawyer in San Antonio. "Heard about your situation through Dad. If you want to fight this, I can put you in touch with some people who specialize in military discrimination cases." For a moment, Sarah considered it. A lawsuit might vindicate her, but it would also end her career. The military had ways of making life miserable for troublemakers, even when they were technically in the right. No, if she was going to fight this, it would be on their terms, using their rules. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks in her new administrative role, filing reports and managing schedules for the squadron she'd once been part of. It was mind-numbing work that felt like a prison sentence, but she used the time to observe and learn. Kane had installed himself in Harrison's office, effectively taking over day-to-day operations of the squadron. Sarah noticed that he held daily briefings with his hand-picked inner circle, all male pilots who seemed to share his views on traditional military values. More importantly, Sarah noticed that Kane was pushing the squadron beyond its limits. The Phase 2 testing he'd mentioned was indeed more extreme than anything they'd done before, but it was also more reckless. Pilots were being asked to push their aircraft into dangerous flight envelopes with minimal safety protocols. During her 3rd week in administrative purgatory, Sarah was filing incident reports when she came across something that made her heart race. Buried in the technical data from recent test flights was evidence of a systematic cover-up. 2 pilots had reported serious mechanical issues with their aircraft during high-stress maneuvers, but Kane had ordered the incidents classified as pilot error rather than equipment failure. More disturbing, the same types of failures were occurring across multiple aircraft, suggesting a fundamental flaw in either the equipment or the testing procedures. Sarah knew she was looking at evidence of criminal negligence. Kane was so focused on pushing his pilots to prove some twisted point about masculinity that he was willing to risk their lives. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She carefully copied the incident reports and technical data, then encrypted the files on a secure drive. If Kane wanted to play games with careers and lives, she would make sure someone with actual integrity knew what was happening. The next morning, Sarah requested a meeting with General Patricia Rodriguez, the base commander. Rodriguez was a legend in the Air Force, one of the first women to command a fighter wing and someone who had fought her own battles against discrimination throughout her career. Getting the meeting wasn't easy. Sarah had to go through channels, formally requesting an appointment through Kane's office. When Kane learned of her request, he summoned her to his temporary office. "Captain Martinez," Kane said without looking up from his paperwork, "I understand you want to waste the General's time with some sort of complaint." "Sir, I have information about safety violations in the test program that I believe require immediate attention," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. Kane finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Safety violations? That's a serious accusation, Captain. I hope you have substantial evidence to back up such claims." "I do, sir." Kane leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know, Captain, filing false reports is a court-martial offense. Your career could be over before you reach the General's office." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Then I guess it's a good thing my reports are accurate, sir." The meeting with General Rodriguez took place 3 days later. Rodriguez was a compact woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She listened without interruption as Sarah presented her evidence, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her deep technical knowledge. "This is troubling," Rodriguez said finally, reviewing the incident reports. "These failure patterns should have triggered a full investigation weeks ago." "Yes, ma'am. Colonel Kane classified them as pilot error and continued the testing program." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly at Sarah. "Captain, I want you to know that what you've done here took considerable courage. Whistleblowing isn't easy, especially when it involves senior officers." "Thank you, ma'am. I just couldn't stand by and watch good pilots get hurt because someone was too proud to admit there might be problems with the program." "What outcome are you hoping for here, Captain?" Sarah had thought about this question for days. "I want the safety issues addressed before someone gets killed. And I want a fair chance to serve in the capacity I'm trained for." General Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I can promise you the first. The second, well, that may take care of itself." Unknown to Sarah, her meeting with General Rodriguez had set in motion a chain of events that would soon reach the highest levels of the Pentagon. The safety violations she'd uncovered were just the tip of the iceberg. A full investigation would reveal that Kane had been pressuring mechanics to sign off on aircraft that hadn't been properly serviced, pushing pilots beyond safe operational limits, and falsifying reports to hide the growing number of incidents. But the investigation would take time, and Kane still held power over the squadron. When he learned about Sarah's meeting with the general, his veneer of professional courtesy finally cracked. "You treacherous little bitch," Kane snarled when he cornered Sarah in the admin office late one evening. "You think you can destroy my career and get away with it?" Sarah stood her ground, though her heart was pounding. "I think I can save lives by making sure incompetent officers don't endanger good pilots." Kane stepped closer, using his height to try to intimidate her. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends who can make sure you never fly again, in the military or civilian sector. Then they'll be disappointed to learn that I don't scare easily." Kane's face turned red with rage. "We'll see about that. You're going to withdraw your accusations and request a transfer to some desk job where you belong. Otherwise, things are going to get very difficult for you." Sarah looked him straight in the eye. "Do your worst, Colonel. But remember, I have all the evidence, and now other people do too." That weekend, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Viper showed up at her apartment, looking haggard and worried. "Ghost, we need to talk," he said. "Things are getting bad back at the squadron." Sarah let him in, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "What's happening?" "Kane's lost his mind. Ever since your meeting with Rodriguez, he's been pushing us harder and harder. Yesterday, he ordered me to take my bird up in conditions that were borderline unsafe. When I questioned it, he threatened to have me grounded for insubordination. Sarah poured them both coffee and sat down across from her friend. How are the other pilots handling it? Most of them are scared to speak up. Keynes made it clear that anyone who challenges him will face consequences. But Ghost, it's not just about intimidation anymore. I think someone's going to get killed if this continues. As if to underscore his point, Viper's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. They both looked at the screen and saw the words that sent chills down their spines. Aircraft down at Nellis AFB. Emergency crews responding. Sarah and Viper raced to the base, arriving to find emergency vehicles surrounding the crash site. A test aircraft had gone down during what should have been a routine maneuver, the pilot barely escaping with his life. As Sarah watched the firefighters extinguish the burning wreckage, she realized that her war with Kane was about to become something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. In the distance, she could see transport planes arriving, more aircraft and personnel than any normal investigation would require. Something was happening, something that would soon require the skills of every qualified pilot the Air Force could muster. And despite Kane's efforts to sideline her, Sarah Martinez was about to find herself thrust back into the center of the action in ways she never could have imagined. The crashed pilot was Captain Tommy "Rocket" Williams, a young hotshot who reminded Sarah of herself 10 years ago. She watched from behind the emergency perimeter as paramedics loaded him into an ambulance, his face pale but his eyes alert. He'd live, but his F-35 was a twisted mess of metal and composite materials scattered across the Nevada desert. Within hours, the crash site was crawling with investigators from multiple agencies. Sarah recognized the insignia of the Air Force Safety Investigation Board, but there were others she couldn't identify, men and women in civilian clothes with the bearing of intelligence operatives. "This is bigger than just a training accident," Viper murmured to her as they watched the activity from the base perimeter. He was right. Sarah had seen enough crash investigations to know that this level of response was unprecedented for a single aircraft loss during peacetime training. Something else was happening. The answer came 3 days later, when General Rodriguez summoned all squadron personnel to an emergency briefing. The base theater was packed with pilots, ground crew, and support staff, all waiting anxiously for answers. Colonel Kane was notably absent. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Rodriguez began, her voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium, "I'm going to share information with you that is classified at the highest levels. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Around her, she could see other personnel leaning forward in anticipation. 6 days ago, our monitoring stations detected significant military buildups by hostile nations in 3 separate regions of the world. Intelligence suggests these buildups are coordinated and represent the most serious threat to global security since the Cold War. The room was dead silent. Rodriguez continued, "The crash of Captain Williams's aircraft was not an accident. Analysis of the wreckage has revealed evidence of sophisticated electronic warfare systems that were used to interfere with our aircraft's navigation and control systems." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as the implications became clear. Enemy forces have developed new capabilities that can effectively neutralize our current generation of fighter aircraft. The testing program you've been participating in wasn't just about evaluating new systems. It was about developing countermeasures to these threats. General Rodriguez paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "Colonel Kane's mismanagement of the testing program has left us weeks behind schedule in developing these critical defensive systems. Due to his negligence, pilots' lives were endangered, and valuable test data was lost." Sarah glanced around the room and saw a mixture of shock, anger, and determination on the faces of her fellow airmen. "Effective immediately, Colonel Kane has been relieved of duty and placed under investigation. The testing program will resume under new leadership, with safety protocols properly implemented." Rodriguez's eyes found Sarah in the crowd. "Captain Martinez, please report to my office at 800 tomorrow morning. You've been reassigned to active duty status with the squadron." After the briefing, Sarah found herself surrounded by her former squadron mates, many offering congratulations and apologies for the way she'd been treated. But her mind was focused on bigger questions. That evening, she met with Colonel Harrison, who had been restored to his position as squadron commander. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," Harrison said. "I should have fought harder against Kane's decision from the beginning. What matters now is that we fix the problems and get back to doing our job," Sarah replied. "But I need to understand what we're really dealing with. This isn't just about test programs anymore, is it?" Harrison's expression was grim. "No, it's not. The intelligence community believes we're looking at the possibility of a coordinated multi-front conflict within the next several months. The enemy has been developing their electronic warfare capabilities specifically to counter our air superiority. How bad is it?" "Bad enough that every available pilot with combat experience is being recalled to active duty. Bad enough that we're accelerating the deployment of every advanced system we have, even if testing isn't complete." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. "What about the countermeasures? How close are we to having effective defenses?" "That's where you come in. Your background in electronic warfare systems, combined with your combat experience, makes you uniquely qualified to help lead the development team. You'll be working directly with our top engineers and test pilots to adapt our aircraft for the new threat environment." The next morning, Sarah reported to a secure facility she'd never seen before, hidden beneath the main aircraft hangars. The underground complex was a marvel of engineering, filled with sophisticated computers, testing equipment, and mock-ups of aircraft systems. She was greeted by Dr. Lisa Chen, the chief engineer for the Countermeasures Project. Dr. A. Chen was a brilliant woman in her 40s who had helped design some of the Air Force's most advanced electronic warfare systems. "Captain Martinez, thank you for joining us. I've reviewed your file. Your graduate work in electrical engineering at the Academy was impressive, and your field reports from combat missions show you have excellent instincts for electronic warfare tactics." Dr. Chen led Sarah through the facility, explaining the nature of the threats they were facing. "The enemy has developed something we're calling ghost signals, electromagnetic pulses that can trick our aircraft systems into believing they're receiving legitimate navigation or control inputs." They stopped in front of a bank of monitors showing aircraft telemetry data. "Here's what happened to Captain Williams's aircraft. At precisely 13:47 hours, his F-35 began receiving false GPS signals that gradually shifted his perceived position by several miles. When he attempted to correct his flight path based on what his instruments were telling him, he actually flew directly into the path of electromagnetic interference that overloaded his flight control systems." Sarah studied the data, her mind racing. So the aircraft didn't malfunction, it was essentially hijacked by false information. Exactly. And this is just one example of what they can do. Intelligence suggests they have similar capabilities to interfere with weapons systems, communications, and even life support systems. Over the next several weeks, Sarah threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She led test flights of aircraft equipped with experimental countermeasure systems, working 18-hour days to analyze data and refine defensive protocols. The work was dangerous. Several times, Sarah found herself in aircraft that were being actively attacked by simulated enemy electronic warfare systems, but each test brought them closer to understanding how to protect American pilots from these new threats. During one particularly harrowing test flight, Sarah's aircraft was hit with a ghost signal so sophisticated that her instruments told her she was flying inverted when she was actually in level flight. Only her years of experience and training allowed her to ignore the false information and safely return to base. "That was too close," Viper said when she climbed out of the cockpit, her hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "But we learned something important," Sarah replied, pulling off her helmet. "The ghost signals work by overwhelming our systems with false data. If we can teach our computers to recognize patterns in the interference, we might be able to filter out the false signals." Dr. Chen was waiting in the debrief room with a team of engineers. "Sarah's right. The data from today's flight shows clear patterns in the enemy signals. If we can develop real-time analysis algorithms, we can create a system that warns pilots when they're being targeted." Progress was rapid once they understood the nature of the threat. Sarah found herself working with some of the most brilliant minds in the Air Force, and for the first time in her career, she felt like her ideas were truly valued and implemented. But time was running out. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were massing for coordinated attacks that could begin at any moment. The electronic warfare capabilities they'd discovered were just one part of a larger strategy designed to neutralize American air power before traditional defenses could respond. General Rodriguez called Sarah to her office on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after she'd been reassigned to the project. "Captain, I have an offer for you," Rodriguez said without preamble. "Based on your work on the countermeasures project, you're being recommended for promotion to major and assignment as deputy commander of the 422nd Squadron." Sarah felt her breath catch. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but isn't that a bit irregular? I've only been back on active duty for 3 weeks. These aren't regular times, Captain. Your technical expertise, combined with your combat experience and leadership abilities, makes you uniquely qualified for this position. Colonel Harrison specifically requested you." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you. Intelligence suggests we may be looking at the largest air battle since World War II within the next few months. We need every experienced leader we can get. What about the other pilots? Some of them have more seniority. Seniority doesn't mean much when you're facing technology that could render traditional tactics obsolete. You understand the new threats better than anyone except Dr. Chen, and you've proven you can perform under pressure." Sarah accepted the promotion, but she knew it came with enormous responsibility. Over the next several days, she worked with Colonel Harrison to prepare the squadron for what intelligence was calling Operation Steel Eagle, a massive defensive operation designed to counter the expected enemy offensive. The briefings painted a sobering picture. Enemy forces had assembled the largest air armada in decades, with advanced fighters, bombers, and electronic warfare aircraft positioned across 3 separate fronts. Intelligence estimated they would face nearly 300 enemy aircraft in coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm American defenses. "Our job," Harrison explained to the assembled pilots, "is to lead the defensive response. We'll be coordinating with squadrons from multiple bases to put together a force of approximately 100 aircraft. It will be the largest air engagement the U.S. has participated in since Vietnam." Sarah looked around the briefing room at faces that had become familiar over the past months. These weren't just pilots anymore. They were her pilots, men and women whose lives she was responsible for. Viper raised his hand. "Sir, what about the electronic warfare threats? Are we confident our countermeasures will work?" Harrison glanced at Sarah, who stood to address the question. "We've tested our defensive systems extensively, but this will be their first real combat deployment. The good news is that we understand how the enemy systems work. The bad news is that we don't know what other capabilities they might have that we haven't seen yet." She paused, making eye contact with each pilot. "What I can tell you is that every aircraft will be equipped with the latest countermeasure systems, and we've developed protocols for operating even if those systems fail. We've trained for this, and we're as ready as we can be." After the briefing, Sarah stood alone in the empty room, staring at the tactical displays that showed the disposition of enemy forces. The magnitude of what they were facing was overwhelming. Hundreds of lives, both American and enemy, would be lost in the coming battle. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Heard through the family grapevine that you're back in the cockpit. Dad says to kick some ass and come home safe. Sarah smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Her family had always supported her dreams, even when the rest of the world seemed determined to crush them. Now she had a chance to prove that their faith in her hadn't been misplaced. But first, she had to survive the biggest air battle in modern history. The call came at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was jolted awake by her secure phone buzzing urgently. Colonel Harrison's voice was calm but tense. "Sarah, this is it. Enemy forces began moving 30 minutes ago. We launch in 2 hours." Sarah was already reaching for her flight suit before Harrison finished speaking. "Understood, sir. I'll be at the squadron in 15 minutes. As she raced through the pre-dawn darkness toward the flight line, Sarah could see the base coming alive around her. Ground crews were racing between aircraft, loading weapons and fuel. In the distance, she could hear the whine of jet engines as the first aircraft began their startup procedures. The biggest battle of her career was about to begin. And everything she had fought for, her right to serve, her technical expertise, and her leadership abilities, would be tested in the unforgiving crucible of aerial combat. The war Colonel Kane had tried to prevent her from fighting was about to prove that talent and courage mattered more than prejudice and politics. But first, she had to lead her pilots through a battle that would determine the course of the conflict, and possibly the future of air warfare itself. Major Sarah "Ghost" Martinez strapped herself into the cockpit of her F-35 Lightning II, her hands moving through the pre-flight checklist with practiced efficiency. Around her, the flight line at Nellis Air Force Base buzzed with activity as 99 other fighter aircraft prepared for launch. This was Operation Steel Eagle, and Sarah found herself in command of the largest American air formation since the Vietnam War. Through her headset, she could hear the controlled chaos of radio communications as squadron leaders checked in from bases across the Southwest. Aircraft from Luke Air Force Base, Davis-Monthan, and Mountain Home had converged for this mission, creating a force that represented the cream of American air power. "Ghost Leader, this is Control," came the voice of General Rodriguez from the command center. "You have tactical command of all air assets. Weather is clear, winds calm. Enemy formation is approximately 200 miles northeast and closing. You are cleared for immediate departure." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. 100 of America's best pilots were looking to her for leadership in what intelligence predicted would be the most complex air battle in modern history. "All squadrons, this is Ghost Leader," Sarah transmitted on the tactical frequency. "Remember your training, trust your wingmen, and let's show these enemies what American air power can do. Form up on me for departure." The sound of jet engines reached a crescendo as the massive formation began rolling down multiple runways. Sarah's F-35 lifted off first, followed by waves of aircraft that darkened the desert sky. F-22 Raptors, F-16 Fighting Falcons, F-15 Eagles, and more F-35s created a sight that would have been impressive in peacetime and was absolutely awesome in preparation for battle. As they climbed to altitude, Sarah reviewed the intelligence reports one final time. Enemy forces had launched from 3 separate locations, with their main formation consisting of advanced fighters and bombers protected by sophisticated electronic warfare aircraft. The enemy's strategy was clear: use their electronic warfare capabilities to blind and confuse American fighters, then destroy them with conventional weapons. "Ghost Leader, this is Viper," came the familiar voice of her wingman. "Long-range radar is picking up multiple contacts bearing 045, range 180 miles. Count shows approximately 180 aircraft in the main formation." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The enemy had launched with nearly double the aircraft intelligence had predicted. "Control, Ghost Leader. Confirm enemy numbers. We're showing 180-plus contacts, not the 100 originally estimated." "Confirmed. Ghost Leader," Rodriguez's voice was calm despite the troubling news. Intelligence indicates they've launched reserve formations from secondary bases. You still have tactical command. How do you want to proceed? Sarah's mind raced through the tactical possibilities. Her formation was outnumbered nearly 2-1, but they had advantages in training, technology, and most importantly, they understood the enemy's electronic warfare capabilities. All squadrons, Ghost Leader. We're facing larger numbers than expected, but we have surprise on our side. They don't know we've developed countermeasures to their electronic warfare systems. We're going to use that advantage. She switched to the command frequency shared by squadron leaders. Raptor Leader, Eagle Leader, Viper Leader, Ghost Leader. Here's the plan. We'll approach in 3 waves. Raptors take high altitude and establish air superiority. Eagles and half the F-35s form the second wave and target their bombers. Remaining F-35s and Falcons form the low-altitude strike wave and eliminate their electronic warfare aircraft. The acknowledgments came back crisp and professional. These were veteran pilots who understood the complexity of coordinating such a large formation. As they closed the distance to the enemy formation, Sarah's instruments began showing the first signs of electronic interference. Her navigation system flickered momentarily, and she could hear static building in her radio communications. All aircraft, Ghost Leader. We're entering their electronic warfare envelope. Activate countermeasure systems and prepare for signal interference. Remember, trust your training over your instruments if something doesn't feel right. The countermeasure systems Sarah had helped develop immediately went to work, analyzing the incoming electronic signals and filtering out the false information. On her tactical display, she could see red icons indicating detected ghost signals attempting to feed false data to her navigation and weapons systems. Ghost Leader, Raptor Leader, we're getting heavy interference up here. Multiple false targeting solutions and navigation anomalies. Roger, Raptor Leader. Your countermeasures should be filtering most of it. If you get conflicting information from your instruments, trust your training and maintain formation integrity. The enemy formation appeared on their long-range sensors like an electronic storm cloud. Their electronic warfare aircraft creating a protective bubble of interference around the main force. Sarah could see why this strategy had been so effective in their previous engagements. Pilots who didn't understand what was happening would quickly become disoriented and vulnerable. But Sarah and her pilots knew exactly what they were facing. All squadrons, Ghost Leader, execute attack plan. Raptors, you're cleared to engage enemy fighters. Stay above 35,000 feet and watch for their electronic warfare effects. Eagles and Ghost Squadron, target the bomber formation. Vipers and Falcon Squadron, those electronic warfare birds are your priority. The massive formation split apart as planned, each element moving toward its assigned targets. Sarah led her portion of the F-35s toward the enemy bomber formation, watching her instruments carefully as the electronic interference intensified. Suddenly, her radar display showed enemy missiles incoming from an impossible direction. According to her instruments, the missiles were coming from directly above her, even though she knew the enemy aircraft were ahead and slightly below. All aircraft, be advised we're seeing false missile warnings, Sarah transmitted calmly. Trust your visual confirmation and maintain course. The first engagement began when the F-22s encountered the enemy fighter screen. Sarah could hear the terse radio calls as her pilots engaged targets at beyond visual range, their advanced missiles streaking toward enemy aircraft that were struggling to cope with the electronic complexity of the battle. Raptor 3, Splash 1 Bandit. Raptor Leader, I'm seeing false lock warnings. Continuing engagement. Ghost Leader, Eagle 4, we have visual on the bomber formation. Count shows 12 heavy bombers with fighter escort. Sarah could see the enemy bombers now. Large aircraft loaded with weapons that could devastate American ground forces if they reached their targets. But they were protected by a screen of advanced fighters and the constant stream of electronic interference from their warfare aircraft. Eagle Squadron, Ghost Squadron, this is Ghost Leader. We're going in. Watch for coordinated turns by the bomber formation. Their electronic warfare may be feeding them false information about our positions, too. The attack began with Sarah diving toward the bomber formation, her wingman and the rest of Ghost Squadron following in perfect formation. Enemy fighters turned to intercept them, but they seemed confused by the electronic chaos surrounding the battle. Sarah locked onto the lead bomber and fired 2 missiles, watching them streak toward the target through the haze of electronic interference. At the same time, she could see tracers filling the air around her as enemy fighters tried to engage her formation. "Ghost Leader, break right!" Viper's voice crackled through her headset. Sarah yanked her aircraft into a sharp turn, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat. An enemy missile streaked past her canopy, so close she could see the exhaust trail. The air battle quickly became a 3-dimensional chess game played at supersonic speeds. Sarah found herself constantly evaluating whether the information on her instruments was real or the product of enemy electronic warfare. When her radar showed an enemy fighter directly in front of her, she looked through her canopy and saw empty sky. When her navigation system told her she was flying west, the sun's position told her she was actually heading north. But the countermeasure systems she had helped develop were working. While the enemy electronic warfare created confusion, it wasn't the crippling advantage they had expected. American pilots were adapting to the threat, using visual confirmation and formation flying to overcome the false information. Ghost Leader, Falcon Leader, we've located the primary electronic warfare aircraft engaging now. This was the crucial moment. If they could eliminate the enemy's electronic warfare capabilities, the rest of the battle would become much simpler. Sarah watched her tactical display as Falcon Squadron dove toward the enemy electronic warfare aircraft, specialized planes that looked like flying antennas. These were the source of much of the confusion plaguing both sides. "Falcon 3, Splash 1 EW Bird. Falcon Leader, good kill on the second target." As the enemy electronic warfare aircraft were destroyed one by one, Sarah could see the immediate effect on the battle. The electronic interference began to fade, and her instruments started showing more reliable information. With their electronic protection reduced, the enemy formation began to fall apart. The bomber formation, deprived of accurate navigation information, became scattered and vulnerable. Enemy fighters, no longer able to coordinate their attacks effectively, found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered by American pilots who were used to operating in complex electronic environments. "All squadrons, Ghost Leader. The electronic warfare threat is significantly reduced. Press the attack and maintain formation integrity." Sarah rolled her F-35 inverted and dove toward an enemy fighter that was climbing toward one of her squadron mates. The enemy pilot apparently didn't see her approach. Without his electronic warfare support, his situational awareness had been severely degraded. Sarah's missile found its target, and the enemy fighter exploded in a brilliant fireball that briefly illuminated the desert floor 30,000 feet below. The battle was turning into a rout. Enemy aircraft, designed to operate with the support of sophisticated electronic warfare systems, proved vulnerable once those systems were neutralized. American pilots, trained to fight in complex environments, adapted quickly to the changing conditions. Ghost Leader, control. Satellite imagery shows additional enemy formations launching from reserve bases. Estimated time to intercept is 40 minutes. Sarah checked her fuel and weapons status. Her formation had been in combat for 30 minutes, and they had expanded significant ammunition and fuel. But the threat wasn't over. "Control, Ghost Leader. What's the estimated strength of the incoming formations?" "Approximately 150 aircraft in 2 separate formations approaching from the northeast and southeast." Sarah made a quick calculation. Her forces had suffered minimal casualties so far. Intelligence reports showed they had destroyed nearly 100 enemy aircraft while losing only 6 of their own. But they were low on fuel and ammunition, and the enemy was sending fresh formations to continue the battle. All squadron leaders, Ghost Leader. Status report on fuel and ammunition. The reports came back quickly. Most aircraft had enough fuel for another 30 minutes of combat, but ammunition was running low. Several pilots had already expended all their missiles and were returning to base. Sarah made the decision that would define her leadership. Control, Ghost Leader. Recommend immediate launch of reserve formations to engage incoming threats. Current force will continue engagement until relieved, then return to base for refuel and rearm. Negative, Ghost Leader. Intelligence indicates the incoming formations have improved electronic warfare capabilities. Recommend full withdrawal of current force. Sarah looked around at the ongoing air battle. Enemy aircraft were still in the area, and withdrawing now would leave American ground forces vulnerable to attack. But staying meant risking her pilots' lives with reduced ammunition and fuel. She thought about all the obstacles she had overcome to reach this moment. The discrimination, the bureaucracy, the attempts to sideline her because of her gender. None of that mattered now. What mattered was protecting American lives and completing the mission. Control, Ghost Leader. We'll maintain position and continue engagement. We have enough fuel and ammunition for limited combat operations. Ghost Leader. That's not advisable given your current status. Sarah's voice was calm but firm. Control. I have tactical command of this operation. We're staying. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah led her depleted force in a fighting withdrawal, engaging enemy aircraft while slowly moving toward friendly airspace. Her pilots displayed incredible skill and courage, making every shot count while conserving fuel for the long flight home. The incoming enemy formations arrived just as American reserve forces launched from bases across the region. Sarah watched with pride as her replacement took command of fresh squadrons and continued the battle her force had started. Ghost Leader, Angel Leader. I have tactical command of incoming formations. Outstanding work out there. RTB when ready. Roger, Angel Leader. Good hunting. As Sarah led her formation back to base, she reflected on what they had accomplished. Operation Steel Eagle had been a complete success. Enemy forces had been defeated decisively, with American casualties kept to a minimum. The electronic warfare threat that had seemed so formidable had been neutralized by careful preparation and superior training. But more importantly to Sarah personally, she had proven that leadership wasn't about gender or politics. It was about competence, courage, and the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. The landing at Nellis was triumphant. Ground crews lined the flight line, cheering as the returning aircraft touched down. Sarah was the last to land, following the tradition that the mission commander brings everyone home. As she shut down her engines and climbed out of her cockpit, Sarah was greeted by General Rodriguez, Colonel Harrison, and what seemed like half the base personnel. Major Martinez, Rodriguez said formally, then broke into a smile. Outstanding job out there. Intelligence reports indicate enemy air forces have been effectively neutralized across all three fronts. This was the decisive engagement of the conflict. Sarah pulled off her helmet, feeling exhausted but exhilarated. Thank you, ma'am. It was a team effort. Every pilot out there performed magnificently. Your tactical decisions were flawless, Harrison added. The way you adapted to changing conditions and maintained formation integrity under electronic attack was textbook perfect. As the celebration continued around her, Sarah thought about the young girl who had dreamed of flying at an air show 20 years ago. That girl had faced skepticism and discrimination at every turn, but she had never given up on her dreams. Now Major Sarah "Ghost" Martinez stood on a flight line surrounded by the wreckage of enemy aircraft and the cheers of her fellow warriors. She had not only proven herself as a pilot and leader, she had helped redefine what those roles could look like. The next morning, Sarah received a call from the Pentagon. The voice on the other end belonged to a general she had never met, but whose reputation was legendary throughout the Air Force. Major Martinez, this is General Thompson. I want to personally thank you for your performance yesterday. Your tactical leadership prevented what could have been a catastrophic defeat. Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job. Major, we'd like you to consider a new assignment. We're forming a new squadron specifically focused on electronic warfare and advanced tactics. You'd be the commanding officer, with a promotion to lieutenant colonel. Interested? Sarah looked out the window of her office at the flight line, where maintenance crews were already preparing aircraft for the next mission. In the distance, she could see young pilots walking toward their aircraft, the same mix of excitement and determination she remembered from her own early days. Sir, I'm very interested. When do I start? Colonel Kane's attempts to sideline her because of her gender seemed like ancient history now. Sarah had not only proven her worth, she had helped lead the largest air victory in a generation and earned recognition as one of the Air Force's premier tactical leaders. As she hung up the phone, Sarah smiled to herself. The little girl who dreamed of flying had grown up to lead 100 fighter jets in the sky's biggest battle, and this was just the beginning of what she could accomplish. The war was far from over, but Sarah Martinez had proven that in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft, talent and courage mattered more than prejudice and politics. She had earned her place among the elite not because anyone gave it to her, but because she had fought for it every step of the way. And in the unforgiving crucible of aerial combat, that was the only currency that truly mattered.